and so on. But, let's put things into perspective. Huh? So in light of this, I would say that actually the developed countries, rather than kind of denying that they are doing any protection, rather than repeating that they are believing in free trade, but doing these things, basically undermining their own position, I think that's actually not very productive. I think it's better to accept that they need protection at this particular moment and try to introduce more transparent and time-bound protectionist policies with a clear restructuring strategy and performance conditionalities. In the 1970s, countries like Japan and Sweden did that, and they readjusted their economy much more quickly and got rid of these protectionist measures much more clearly than countries like the UK, which kept saying, oh, no, we do free trade, and then out of necessity they were doing all sorts of other things. So I think that's one thing they should do. Otherwise, they will make the mockery of the international trading system. 5 years down the line, a lot of developing countries are going to say, well, we are going to leave the WTO. You are making a joke out of it. No, I don't want that. I want, despite my criticisms, I want the multilateral trading system to be preserved. So I think that's one thing the developed countries should do. But more importantly, they should not use this simply as a way to assert their protectionist needs. Finally, time has come for them to admit that the kind of free trade agenda that they have been pursuing has not worked, especially for developing countries, and they should make it easier for the developing countries to use trade protectionism and other policies that are more suitable to their levels of development. Free trade policy today might work for Belgium, but it doesn't work for Cambodia. It doesn't work for the Argentina. Finally, when I say these things, people say, yeah, but we need a level playing field. No, seriously, in a football game, one team is Brazilian national team and the other team is Argentinian national team, and if you say the Brazilians attack from up the hill and Argentinians defend from down the hill, no, it's an unfair game. You can't have that. So using that, people say, well, isn't it grossly unfair that Japan has only 3% tariff and India has 32%? So we should level the playing field. Now, this is completely wrong. Of course, it's something that's not easy to say, because the level playing field is like, as you Americans say, the apple pie and motherhood. Saying that I'm against a level playing field, that sounds like saying I eat babies for breakfast. But when you have unequal players, level playing field is actually the wrong principle. In a football game, if one team is the Brazilian national team and the other is my 13-year-old daughter's friends, I would say it's only fair that the girls attack from up the hill. Now, in the real life, you don't see this kind of tilted playing field, exactly because this kind of competition is structurally banned. Gender division, age classes, and in a lot of sports, you have the weight classes, boxing, wrestling, weightlifting. And do you know how fine these weight classes are? In the lower weight classes, like the flyweight and so on, the weight bands are between 2 and 3 pounds. So in the boxing, you think it's so unfair that someone who's 4 pounds heavier than someone else boxes the light guy. You structurally ban this kind of competition by putting them in different weight classes. And in international trade, you say Honduras should compete on equal terms with the Netherlands. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Don't want to waste too much time talking. I think we should spend more time debating. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. And I love that over the course of the presentation, the pictures have gotten more colorful, and particularly like the pictures of the weight classes. And if we think about weight classes and global trade and development, I think it's very informative that, for example, the European Union, when it looked at its own internal development with some lesser developed countries and some more developed economies, actually had discussions about European Union of several speeds, kind of in various concentric rings.
That's right.
And discussed, for example, issues like a cohesion fund that would help countries within the European Union to adjust very slowly. But unfortunately, the European Union, like other global players, have given up that kind of approach in dealing with a lot of the developing countries. Mark, may I invite you? Sure. Next.
Okay, I'll just make a few remarks here. Thank you very much to everyone and to Ha-Joon for coming here. And we're also glad that Ha-Joon is a research associate of the Center for Economic and Policy Research too. And I always love his presentations because he kind of tells it like it is and uses historical examples that economists today don't really talk about. I want to say just a couple of things on what is happening to neoliberalism that Ha-Joon talked about in the world and how it might come out at the other end of this crisis and what countries might be able to do and what are the institutional obstacles. As Ha-Joon, obviously there's been a huge economic failure in the vast majority of low and middle income countries over the past, nearly 30 years now. And most of the past 30 years, except for the last few that he mentioned, there were some pickup in growth, and that, of course, is now disappearing. So, what are these neoliberal policies? Just to, very briefly, I think you have an abandonment of development strategies in general. You have overly restrictive macroeconomic policies, an obsession with inflation in particular. So both at the central bank, but also in terms of fiscal policy. These are obstacles to development. You had, kind of indiscriminate privatizations, as again in most of the developing world. And you also had the redistributional policies were not entirely by accident. You had a lot of attacks on labor in general, and what neoliberal economists call making labor markets more flexible. So all of these were combined, and you have had quite a rebellion against that. And in Latin America, for example, where we do a lot of work, in the last decade, you've had elections in Argentina, Brazil, Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Uruguay, Paraguay, Nicaragua, where in all of these elections, candidates ran against what they actually called neoliberalism. It's a much more common word in Latin America, and and in various countries they did change policy to different policies in different countries and to varying degrees, but they definitely changed it at the macro level. Argentina, for example, and Venezuela both had changed their macroeconomic policies, and they had very, very rapid growth. Venezuela doubled the size of its economy in the past 5.5 years, and since they got they had to get control of the natural resources. That was another kind of non-neoliberal policy. But since then, and you've had enormous poverty reductions as well. Poverty has been cut in half, extreme poverty by over 70%. Argentina, same thing. Everybody said, well, you said goodbye to the IMF. You're changing your policies. Your macro policies are unsound because the central bank is going to target the exchange rate and not just inflation. They're going to have a stable, competitive exchange rate, big part of their macro policy. Everybody said, all the press was unanimous, the business press at the time, in saying that these policies would fail. Instead, they grew about 60% in less than 6 years, and pulled maybe 11, 12 million people out of poverty. And the press is trying